Okay. We have about 3 minutes to go, and I want people to register according to the time we have given them, so we will not start before that. But let me begin by wishing all our eminent speakers and participants a very good morning. And in particular, I would like to welcome my two former colleagues who continue to be very good friends, Ambassadors Ranjit Rai and Manjeev Singh Puri, who have until recently been ambassadors in Kathmandu. So warm welcome to the two of them in particular. I want to use the next 2 minutes until 11 a.m. I have another 2.5 minutes to go over a few housekeeping chores. The first is that we have a certain model to our webinars. And the first point here is that all speakers until invited may also keep their mics muted, please. So therefore, all mics to be kept on mute mode at all times. Secondly, it is possible that in the course of a long drawn webinar, you may wish to eat or drink or resuscitate yourself with some nourishment. But when you do so, kindly blank out your own video, kindly mute your video so that others are not subjected to imagination of what you're eating and drinking. It's also a distraction of sorts. So you will bear with me, and I don't want to be misunderstood on that. You're free to eat and drink, but not on screen, please. Number 3, there is a chat box that we have, which we use for Q&A. And I would request all of you to kindly put in your questions very tersely, briefly, succinctly there. If you wish to socialize among yourselves and send personal messages, kindly do not press the everyone button so that it's just the person that you're greeting that sees your greeting there and reciprocates. Because I'd like to use as host, to the best of my ability, the chat box to soak up all the questions that are coming in so that I can honestly and dutifully pass them on to the eminent panel that we have today. This is really an academic exercise. It's not a public event, so I'd like you to bear with me on that. The whole purpose of this exercise that we are doing today between the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, of which I am the Director General, and the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs. The whole purpose is to ensure that we can be helpful and that we can exchange views in order to advance relations between two friendly neighbors, India and Nepal. So please bear with me on that as well. It's 11 o'clock and I am Sujan, Chinoy, the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and I take this opportunity to wish you all a very good morning and to welcome all the eminent participants and speakers in particular to this webinar on COVID-19 and India-Nepal relations being jointly organized by the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis and the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs in Nepal. I take this opportunity to extend my warmest greetings to Mr. Sunil KC, the CEO and founder, who has cooperated with us. And that is how we, as IDSA, are hosting this webinar today. It's a joint effort. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to Professor S.D. Muni, who is, shall I say, with us at the Institute. He's also, apart from being an eminent scholar, he is also on our executive council. I did, at the very start, extend my warm greetings and extend a very warm welcome to Ambassadors Ranjit Rai and Manjeev Singh Puri, who have really added a bit of luster to our event by finding time to join us. So with these words, I want to tell you something very briefly about the event and how we'll proceed. I'll make a very few short introductory remarks, and then we will have a section on Nepal-India relations, particularly during the COVID period, where we will have the Honorable Mr. Surendra Pandey, former Finance Minister of Nepal, who I welcome very warmly at this webinar. He will speak, followed by Ambassador Ranjit Rai, Dr. Bishnu Raj, Upreti, Head Policy Research Institute of Nepal, and then finally Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri. Then we have another section on India-Nepal relations. It's the same thing really, Nepal, India, India-Nepal. But we will have the Indian perspective there. The charge of the Light Brigade will be led by Professor S.D. Muni from our side. And then we have Dr. Bindu and Lohani, former Vice President of the Asian Development Bank. There's a section on economic aspects of India-Nepal relations too, where we have, again, eminent speakers, Professor Mahendra P. Lama of the Center for South Asian Studies in JNU, and then Dr. Govinda Raj Pokharel, former VC, Nepal Planning Commission. Then there is a section for other issues, where we have the Honorable Abhishek Pratap Shah, Member of Parliament, Nepali Congress, followed by Dr. Nihar Nayak, Research Fellow of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and then a segment has been set aside for Q&A. I want to begin by simply drawing attention to the fact that India-Nepal relations, as you all know and acknowledge, are extremely important. We are historically close neighbors, traditionally warm and friendly neighbors with a shared culture and civilization, our values, ethos, in many parts, religion. There's so many ties that bind us together. And as is said, often we have roti beti ka rishta. I visited Nepal after a gap of some 40 years, 42 years. I went last year for the first time in the beginning when Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri was there. And then again this year, I went again a second time. And the impression that I gathered, I wanted to summarize it in one or two points just in order to provoke you into thinking. It's not comprehensive, what I'm about to say, but I gave a lecture at the Center for Nepal and Asian Studies at Tribhuvan University, and then also some kind of a keynote address at the seminar on India's Neighborhood First Policy and India-Nepal Ties, organized by NAP at the Shangri-La Hotel. This was on the 18th, 19th of February. I found there are many misgivings in Nepal in general about India, particularly about the concept of the Indo-Pacific. That was very, very apparent. And most people, interlocutors, especially at the university where I spoke, looked at the Indo-Pacific concept as being synonymous with a US-led sort of diabolical plan against China. It was also treated as synonymous with the Quad, which it is not. It was treated as synonymous with some grand American strategy to contain China and to use India, as part of that strategy. There was also a lot of confusion between AIIB and BRI, and India's borrowing from the AIIB was construed as being part of the BRI, and yet they said India contradicts itself by opposing the BRI. So there was lack of information there. And an impression that I got that people were being fed constantly with foreign-inspired propaganda. And I was really struck by that. Nepalese officials and scholars also were extremely hesitant and reluctant to speak openly about their own concerns regarding China, for instance. But in private, they were quite happy to express all their views. So that stood out too. So there was a certain coloring of their perception and visions that left me with the impression that it came from a constant barrage of misinformation and propaganda that they were being subjected to. It could just be a perception on my part, but that's what it was. At the university, I also discovered, and of course the experts know all this, but I'm repeating my impressions. At the university, there was a very, very distinct, pronounced leftist bias in terms of how they looked at India. The media too seemed to have been penetrated and was completely divided with a very strong prejudice on many issues, So that's the impression. I'm not going to go into the details of all the other issues which we discussed, which are actually very well known to all our eminent participants today. As far as COVID is concerned, it's a global issue. It's not left any part of the world untouched. And so therefore, neither India nor Nepal are exceptions to this raging pandemic that has wreaked havoc everywhere in terms of, structures, budgets, economies, people's lives. Everything has been upended. Nepal too has a certain number of cases. We wish them well. And on our part, we have India has supplied a fair amount of made in India test kits and things like that. Nepal is also receiving aid and assistance from others, as is normal. Given Nepal's landlocked and LDC status, it's a precarious situation as I see it in the next few years. In the wake of this COVID crisis, Nepal's economic growth rate is expected to plunge drastically because of poor remittances, absolute losses being suffered by the all-important tourism sector. Trade is under duress as elsewhere because of the global slowdown. There is also obvious challenge before agriculture, small-scale industries, and the service sector. The service sector, I believe, contributes a very large part of the country's GDP. I mean, these are the worst hit. With remittances also, the spigot being turned off. Nepal is in for hard times on the economic front. It's under these circumstances that I believe that India and Nepal should be working together to address challenges that are common in the context of COVID. We need to improve our understanding of each other's requirements. We need to cooperate more on the economic front. Prime Minister Modi has, of course, made a very good start by engaging all the countries in South Asia in the context of SAARC. And within that fold, we are all trying to do our best together. So with these few words, I leave it to the participants to unfold before you and to unpack before you all the important issues that drive India-Nepal and Nepal-India relations. And the whole purpose of this exercise, let me assure you, friends, is to be helpful, to try and take this process forward. We will have challenges. There are no neighbors or good friends that don't have issues between them. So India and Nepal are also likely to have some challenges that they will have to tackle. But we need to do this in a calm and collected manner. We need to keep in mind the larger picture of our traditionally close ties. These ties extend even to our two militaries. It's very important, and I'm so glad to see very eminent people with us today. Generals VP Malik, and I can also see instantly Major General Ashok Kumar Mehta. I can see Lieutenant General and former Governor Nirbhay Sharma, who is a particularly good friend of mine too. General Dipankar Banerjee, Admiral Anup Singh. There's so many. If I have missed out any, please forgive me, because it's impossible for me to look at everything on the screen simultaneously. There are several other eminent people here, former ambassadors. I can see Ambassador Rakesh Sood also. So my warmest greetings to him. We've worked very closely together, including on disarmament issues. Too numerous, the list of all the eminence Greece that are present here today for me to go one by one. With these few words, I'd like to now turn over to our first speaker. The first speaker today is the Honorable Mr. Surendra Pandey, former Finance Minister of Nepal, who I would request kindly speak for the next 10 minutes or so. We will try to be strict with the time because we have a very large number of speakers. I thank you for patiently bearing me while I spoke, bearing with me, and I now turn to Mr. Surendra Pandey. The floor is yours. Mr. Pandey, please, 10 minutes. Do we have Mr. Surendra Pandey with us, please?
Yes, sir. I can see Surendra Pandey, but there is no mic. There's some audio issue on his side.
All right. In that case, I will not stand on ceremony. I'll move to the next speaker. And that is, we'll come back to Mr. Pandey when he's fixed his audio issue. And perhaps, Piyush, as webmaster, you can try and see how you can help him by guiding him, even if it involves some settings on his own computer.
I think he joined, sir, with mic. You can call his name and let's see if he
Yeah, please check him out so that you know that he is audible. The Honorable Mr. Surendra Pandey, are you with us?
Yes.
Yes. And I presume you heard all that I had said. The floor is yours. You are speaking on Nepal-India relations, especially in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. And the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes, please. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I couldn't join earlier. Sorry for that. Your Excellency, Chinoy, Director General and Chairman of Defense Studies and Analysis, Shri Sunil Kesi, CEO, Founder, guest speaker, this COVID-19 and Nepal-India relations. First of all, I would like to thank both the for organizing this discussion program. Both Nepal and India have not remained unaffected by COVID-19. Has disrupted the. I believe that this interaction program organized in this crucial moment will. December 2019 was it has seen in Nepalese returning from it was then seen in Nepalese returning from Europe by the Middle East in the last week of the March. The first week of April saw more cases on the Indian and Nepali nationals coming from India were positively diagnosed. On 14th May 2020, Nepal saw the first death due to the COVID-19 when a woman who had just given birth to a child died. There have been 2 more deaths since, and the total number of infected people has reached 487 by now. The government of Nepal imposed a nationwide lockdown on 21st March 2020 and halted all domestic and international flights. It suspended public transport, industries, schools, government offices, and all non-essential activities. Although it has also restricted the movement of people, enforcing it has been especially challenging in the southern part of Nepal due to its open border with India, where both Nepali and Indian nationals are ignoring the lockdown to move across the border. In the recent days, the infection has been on the rise among the Nepalese returning from India, and COVID-19 has also spread to the community level. As Nepalis who have reached the Nepal-India border are denied entry into Nepal, the number of Nepalis entering Nepal secretly has increased. This has COVID-19 infection not only among the in their communities. Instead of denying entry to Nepalis returning from India at the border, the government of Nepal should regulate their entry to Nepal by designated entry points, quarantine them, and send back to their homes after a certain period of time. The government of Nepal should initiate the repatriation of Nepalis living in India wishing to return home with the coordination, management, and assistance of Nepal Embassy in India, together with the cooperation from the government of India. The government of Nepal should also support the Indian government's efforts to repatriate Indian nationals from Nepal. The government of both countries need to provide the necessary facilities and help desk in order to make it easier for people living in Nepal and India to return to their home countries. As far as economy is concerned, COVID-19 has caused a major crisis in the world this year. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) recently projected a 3% contraction in the world economy. US economy and a 0% growth in Asia. Naturally, COVID-19 has already negatively impacted and will further impact both the Nepali and Indian economies as well. According to the latest statistics of Nepal, the economic growth target of the current fiscal year 2019-20 has shrunk from 8.5% to about 2%. The revenue target is expected to be dropped by rupees 1,112 billion to 750 billion. There is a risk of a significant decline in remittances and the loss of nearly 3 million jobs in domestic and foreign employment. The number of Nepali returning to Nepal after losing their jobs abroad is expected to be very large. This number will grow even larger if we take into account the Nepalis returning from India. Nepal's agriculture, tourism, especially hotels and restaurants, transport, aviation, and construction sectors have suffered the most due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, the private sectors have already declared their inability to pay the principal and the interest of the bank and the wages of. This could lead to the wage workers falling into a vicious cycle of hunger and poverty and increase the social unrest and in the society. And beyond the COVID-19 crisis, the cooperation and coordination between Nepal and India will play an important role in covering and in recovering and in the economies and improving the health services that have been badly harmed. It is important to note that although it largely depends on imports, the trade deficit between Nepal and India is increasing every year. The statistic of the last fiscal year 2018-19 shows Nepal's trade deficit with India to be rupees 855 billion. There might be several dimensions to reduce the trade deficit of this magnitude, and both countries should make efforts to reduce it. Despite the service flow from Calcutta and Visakhapatnam ports of India improving significantly compared to the past, the exports to India from Nepal have been far from easy. The annual demand for vegetable ghee in India is estimated to be 8 million metric tons, while Nepal's export capacity is limited to only 300 to 400,000 metric tons. Still, Nepal has not been able to export its vegetable ghee for the past 3-4 months due to the quantitative restriction imposed by India. The export of Nepali tea to India has also come to a standstill due to India's decision to allow imports to Nepal while restricting Nepal's exports through Kakadbita customs checkpoint of eastern Nepal. As the export of tea has stopped, the traders have stopped buying the leaves from the tea farmers, and the farmers have been forced to leave their tea leaves to rot in the gardens. This has tea farmers at extreme stress and a serious financial risk. Similarly, restriction imposed by the Indian government is also hindering Nepal produce jute sacks, jute bags, and other jute materials by purchasing raw jute from the Nepali and the Indian jute farmers in the border areas of eastern Nepal. But for the past 3-4 years, the Indian government has used the anti-dumping and the countervailing provision to block the export of Nepali jute products. As a result, farmers and the jute industries have been confronted with a serious crisis. But bulk cargo rail service that operates for the import of industrial raw materials from Calcutta and Visakhapatnam in India to Birganj in Nepal is a very positive provision for our industries. It has greatly helped our industrial sector to import raw materials, but such provisions are not yet available in the industrial corridors of Viratnagar, Bhairava, and Nepalganj in the west. Furthermore, the heavy truck drivers who transport Nepali imports to Nepal have been complaining for a long time about the difficulties they are facing due to the poor quality of roads in the 20 to 50 kilometer stretch of road connecting the to Nepal's border area. That's to be constructed in Bhai and Nepalganj. I hope that the government of India and the concerned Indian authorities will soon pay due attention to remove these obstacles and start improving and constructing the necessary infrastructure so that the problems mentioned can be resolved soon. Recently, the dispute over the Nepal-India border, especially in the areas of Limpia, Dura, Lipulek, and Kalapani, has heightened. This problem should be solved through friendly discussion and dialogue. Head-to-head talks should be held between the Prime Minister and the political leaders of the two countries. The embassies of the two countries should play a proactive role. The border dispute between India and Bangladesh was resolved in 2016 on the initiative of Indian Prime Minister Modi ji, the border dispute between Nepal and India should be and can be resolved by assimilating that experiences. Nepal's ruling party, the Communist Party of Nepal, CPN, and India's ruling party, Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, should intensify discussion and dialogue at the leadership level, at the government, and at the grassroots level. Both Nepal and India need to take special initiative to resolve any issue in India in this situation. Thanking you. I have concluded my speech.
Yes, thank you.
Now,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Surendra Pandey, the Honorable former Finance Minister of Nepal. Thank you for your valuable comments. These are very helpful. I appreciate the very candid and forthright manner in which you have actually listed out a number of issues, which no doubt will be also commented on by other speakers. I now invite Ambassador Ranjit Rai, India's former ambassador to Nepal, to make his comments. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, Mr. Sunil Kesi, and dear friends, a very good morning to you. We are meeting at a time of global crisis. Not only is there this health pandemic with severe economic, social consequences, but we're also meeting at a time when India-Nepal relations are at a difficult juncture. And I think, that is also the reason why we need more conversations between our two countries at various levels. So this initiative of IDSA and IDEA is very welcome. So my brief presentation, I wanted to touch on two issues. One is, of course, the pandemic, how to combat it, and how to meet the challenges that it presents to our economies. And the second issue, of course, refers to the political relations between India and Nepal in the light of some of the recent developments. Now, as far as the pandemic is concerned, I think, the lives versus livelihoods debate is really moving now towards lifting of lockdowns and resuming economic activity. There is now talk of smart lockdowns or smart quarantine of sensitive people. I think in the initial weeks, we have made progress by, suspending international domestic flights and closing land borders. And this has helped to control the virus, but the problem has not been resolved, and neither has the curve flattened. And we are seeing that, it is rising both, or the disease is increasing both in India and Nepal. And my sense is that, the next 2 months, June and July, are going to be very difficult in both countries. And both of us obviously have to ensure that we have necessary medical facilities and supplies in order to handle this. Now, in the context of Nepal, I'm sure the government of Nepal has made a lot of preparations to deal with this issue. India has also assisted Nepal, as Ambassador Chinoy had earlier mentioned. We've supplied testing kits and medicines. And I'm confident that should Nepal need more assistance, I'm sure government of India would respond positively to such requests. Now, on the implications, the economic implications, I think reference has already been made to the severe impact on the rates of growth on key sectors such as tourism, aviation, service sector. Remittances will be sharply hit. In the context of Nepal, tourism contributes something like 8% of GDP, and remittances represent a third of GDP, something like 7 to 8 billion US dollars. And of the total remittances, some 25% of the remittances come from India. So clearly there is going to be a huge impact in terms of the foreign exchange availability and reserves that Nepal has. And also as Nepali workers in India, some of them might lose their livelihoods, and as they return home, there is going to be this challenge to deal with. So I foresee there may be some problems with regard to availability of Indian rupees, and perhaps the time has come to think of some sort of a currency swap agreement between the national Nepal Rashtra Bank and the Reserve Bank of India. insofar as labor is concerned, we have in India, our migrant labor are now returning to their hometowns, and trains, Shramik trains are being run for them. I'm sure that some of the Nepalese labor in India might also want to go back to their hometowns, and they could also be accommodated in these Shramik trains, especially to the states of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. Under Operation Vande Bharat, we are evacuating Indian citizens from abroad, including from the Gulf. And I believe, should the government of Nepal request, I'm sure government of India could also consider, extending this assistance and facility to the Nepalese labor that is working in the Gulf and in Malaysia. So there are a lot of challenges, and absorbing all this returning labor into our economies, making sure that they are virus-free, providing quarantine facilities. So I believe there is need for continuous conversation between the two countries, bilaterally and as well as in the context of SAARC, where already there have been some discussions at the highest level and at official levels. Both our countries had closed the border in order to prevent movement from either side. And of course, this was necessary at the time. But this has also inconvenienced a lot of people on both sides of the border. And I know for a fact, for instance, in far west Nepal, a lot of the main markets for the Nepalese people are on the Indian side. And the same is true in the Tarai. So, there is a considerable suffering at the level of the cross-border economy, both in the, on the Indian side in the markets, and of course, for the Nepalese population living on the other side. So I think this is an issue that needs to be also looked at, by the two countries. Now, on the political relations, the pandemic has not prevented huge political issues also from being raised and debated and discussed. And in fact, there has been a lot of political activity in Nepal. And you can see a US-China contestation. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy referred to this. The whole debate on the MCC, whether it is part of Indo-Pacific, whether Indo-Pacific is a US-led military alliance, whether it is against China, how does it relate to the BRI? What should Nepal do? Should Nepal join the MCC? Or will this be seen as an anti-China move by Nepal? This is a big debate that has been going on in Nepal, and particularly in the ruling party. And I think, different views have been expressed. So this is one aspect. The second aspect that we have noticed, and especially in the context of the, political turmoil that was witnessed within the Nepalese Communist Party in recent weeks, is, very strong presence, visible presence of Nepal's northern neighbor in the political processes. And this seems to be a new development. I'm no longer in Nepal, so I don't know how the Nepalese media or the Nepalese people have responded to it. But I know from India's experience that, whenever there have been allegations of India's involvement, there's been a huge uproar in Nepalese media and civil society. So in this particular case, I don't know, but this is, I think, a new development that we are noticing. And the third issue, of course, is, we again are witnessing a revival of anti-India nationalism. And this time it is the boundary issue that, is resulting in this. So each time there is, my sense is that each time there is some domestic political problem, an effort is made also to divert attention to it and invariably whip up anti-India sentiments. And, it could be one issue or the other. It might be the 1950 treaty. In this particular case, it's the boundary issue between India and Nepal. And, what happens is before, cool and calm and sane minds can look at the matter, there are huge protest demonstrations, gheraos, dharnas in Nepal, outside the Indian embassy. There are burning of effigies of our political leaders. And this certainly vitiates the atmosphere, for any kind of dialogue. So, unless there is calm and, cool minds prevail, it's very difficult to engage on some of these, extremely sensitive issues. And I think this is something that both sides need to look at and see how to handle. Now, in this particular instance, what has happened is that I think the issue has become more intractable after the unilateral decision of Nepal to bring in a new map which shows different external boundaries of Nepal. And, this map has worked to the detriment of India. Of course, internal boundaries of a country you can change. There is no dispute on that. But if you change a map which impacts on the territory of another country, then clearly this can't be done unilaterally. This needs to be done, through negotiation, bilaterally. Reference was made to the Bangladesh agreement. And especially at a time when we already have a process underway. We have an established mechanism. Both countries are agreed that talks should resume on this issue. So, this kind of action, I think, precipitates matters and makes the problem more intractable. But of course, it's also the tone and the tenor. And, I'm amongst friends, so I want to be very open and honest with you. His Excellency Prime Minister Oli made a speech in Parliament following the President's address. And this has also caused considerable dismay in India, not for the substance, but, for the tone and the tenor of the speech, the references he made to India and to India's sacred emblem, the national emblem and the national motto. And I don't think this kind of language reflects the kind of relationship that exists between India and Nepal. It doesn't reflect the, civilizational ties between our two countries. So this doesn't contribute to an atmosphere where we can develop more trust and understanding. And, please don't get me wrong. I know India-Nepal relations are very, very solid, very strong, very interdependent, very intimate. And these are relations that have not been made by the governments of the two countries. These are ancient historical relationships made by the people of the two countries. So I don't think anything will really cause, as they say in Hindi, a darar or damage the relationship. But I think it's very important for the leadership, in both countries to do everything that we can to nurture this relationship and not do anything that might, provide with some narrow partisan or parochial, gains, but in the process damage the relationship. So on this matter, I think the time has now come to move ahead. I think talks should be resumed. I don't think there's any option other than dialogue and discussion. And of course, I think India's strong view is there is no room for third countries in this process of dialogue and negotiation between India and Nepal on the boundary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ranjit Rai, and thank you for advocating calm, in the midst of these differences that have surfaced. You also made a very interesting point about Indian labor returning from the Gulf and the possibility of bringing Nepalese people also out of there. I leave you with one question which you can address later. A very large number of the people who have returned to India are likely to remain in India because the global economy has slowed down. And will they, to some extent, also take the jobs that otherwise Nepalese citizens take in India? In other words, when the Nepalese come back to India to work, will they find that these jobs are taken by a large number of the returnees that have come in from the Gulf and elsewhere? I now turn to our next speaker, Professor S.D. Muni, Professor Emeritus, JNU, who needs no introduction and very familiar to everyone in Nepal. He will speak to you. Before he starts, I request all panelists to kindly keep looking at the chat box because there are a large number of questions there already, and that might help you to prepare for the Q&A session. Professor S.D. Muni, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead. The
Okay.
floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It is really a very interesting time for this kind of a dialogue, and I think very appropriate time for this kind of a dialogue. Uh, uh, I have been asked to speak on what after the COVID, and it's very difficult really to predict how the COVID and post-COVID situation will unfold itself. But I see two, three things very, very clearly. I think in the post-COVID scenario, both the countries would face tremendous, I would say tremendous internal social pressures. And resulting from that would be political turbulence. Tremendous internal social pressures because a lot of people have got completely dissatisfied, disenchanted with the way the states are meeting their demands in this crisis. And this disaffection, I should not say, dissatisfaction vis-a-vis the state is building up, and they are asking for more and more attention towards their problems. I don't know to what extent these states would be able to, both in India and Nepal, I would say, would be able really to measure up to the expectations of ordinary citizens. And therefore, there would be a lot of social tension facing in both the countries. The result of this would be reflected not in India. I think Indian political system is very stable, but in Nepal, we will see a lot of turbulence. You know, even now, Nepal is passing through a political stage where there are a lot of question marks and uncertainty about the governance and the performance of the government. And even last couple of months, we saw that the present government was in a sort of a crisis. They have got over it for one reason or another. But this kind of a crisis will be coming up again and again. And I fear, in continuation of what my co-panelists have said, I fear that the nationalism issue would be raked up maybe in Nepal, but then it would be reacted also from India in times of nationalism as to why the Indian bashing is used in stabilizing Nepali domestic political situation. So I'm afraid that despite our best intentions, and I respect and accept what Ambassador Rai has said, that we must get together. All of us are saying this, get together. But I think the overall political atmosphere may be vitiated, and we have to take care that it is not vitiated in any way. And one of the other issues which will come up is, of course, because after COVID, whenever it has settled, we don't know how would China and the Asian order, and let me not talk about the global order, Asian order would emerge after that. There are already WHO pressures which the Chinese are reacting. The whole Indo-Pacific is under some sort of a fluid strategic situation. And whatever happens to China will affect both Nepal and India individually as well as bilaterally. I have no doubt about that. And to that extent, I think we must sit down coolly and think about the consequences and implications of what happens to China and how then China reacts. Because if China feels more isolated, it would be far more assertive in whole of Asia and also in South Asia, where Nepal would play a certain kind of a role. And what kind of a role is this which is not disadvantageous to the other neighbors? So I think there is an urgent need to rebuild, I would say, or bridge the so-called trust deficit, which somehow has crept between India and Nepal for the last 4 or 5 years on various counts, on trade counts. Pandey mentioned about the trade, on the question of nationalism, on the question of political equations, on the question of boundary disputes will have to be filled up. And if we cannot bridge this trust deficit, I think we are going to face very difficult period in the post-COVID situation. And this is one caution which I want to say. Now, one of the ways to build this trust deficit, and I would be very brief here, is really to handle the pending issues. And as it has been mentioned by my co-panelists earlier, I think one of the important, most sensitive issue which has come up is this border issue and the Kalapani issue. And I fully agree with Ambassador Rai and many of my Nepali friends, including Pandey, that we should get on the table and somehow resolve this problem. And I think it's not such an insurmountable issue, depending upon how we look at it. One of the approach, or I would say there could be two. The two countries are not going to settle this border issue through by taking resort to arms, which the British did. In every time you refer to 1816 treaty, don't forget the context of the 1816 treaty. That is not the one way in which either of us would want to or can resolve this crime. Therefore, we have to sit on the table. And when we sit on the table, there has to be a principle of give and take. Now, let me stick my neck out and say that on this Kala Pani and the border issue, I think one of the approach can be that either we lease to each other the areas which are being asked, both in Susta, and I'm not taking Kala Pani alone. Susta can also be taken, where appropriately, Kala Pani issue is very deeply connected with the sentiments in India because of Kailash Mansarovar. The Gorkha kings won, though militarily acquired those areas and kept it for only 40 years. But for that, centuries before that, India has been going to Kailash Mansarovar through these tracks and even carrying trade with Tibet. So keeping all this in mind, I think leasing is one way, or swapping of the territory, I would say, could be another one, where we feel the territories are disputed. These are quite unorthodox, out-of-the-box proposals. I said I'm putting my neck on the, to be chopped off if it is. But we have to think out-of-the-box issues and somehow resolve these problems. Otherwise, we might continue with the present kind of a discord which we have in our bilateral relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Muni. And I also wish to seek the pardon of all the panelists. I had a bit of confusion here, so I jumped the order. But since we are speaking among friends, it should not really matter. My next speaker originally actually was intended to be Dr. Bishnu Raj Upreti, head of the Policy Research Institute of Nepal. And therefore, I'd like to revert back to that order. Please bear with me. One interesting point, Professor Muni, that you made was about sitting together and looking at all these differences. I cannot agree with you more. But people often refer to this Treaty of Sagoli, and I'm not an expert. But I do understand that the Treaty of Sagoli also spoke about Kapilavastu and Janakpur and the Terai region and all that actually not being part of Nepal. So the point is, if you go back, harken back to such distant history all the time, then in history or in a particular treaty, you can't be selective. So in other words, in 1865, by then, of course, it was no longer the British East India Company. By then, it was the crown that had taken over and annexed India. But that interpretation that the Tarai would go back to Nepal, though it was not part of the original Treaty of Sagoli. Now, what do you think? That's one of the questions I'm going to ask you later. That if you look at one part of the Treaty of Sagoli, you'll have to look at many other parts. If you look at Article 3, you'll have to look at Article 5, that sort of thing. So, I mean, when you look at treaties and which are 200 years old, you end up obviously in entirety. And no one quite has the clear picture. I now move to the Honorable Nepalese speaker, Dr. Bishnu Raj Upreti, and please accept my apology for jumping that order. You'll forgive me. We do at least 2 webinars a day, so it could be called a webinar fatigue at the end of the day. You might attribute it to my frailties. The floor is yours. 10 minutes, please, Dr. Bishnu Raj Upreti.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. It's not an issue of the order. First of all, I sincerely appreciate your initiative. You and the Sunilji, both of you have organized this and brought the scholar and practitioner, policy maker of both countries to discuss and debate. It is a very good idea. And as earlier you also highlighted, as well as the Ambassador Roy highlighted, we have very special historical relationship since time immemorial. We have the open border issue, cultural, religious, linguistic. We have so much interdependence. Nepali are serving in your military, Indian are working with us. We have the migration worker, we have the mutual collaboration, so many issues. So one point, what is clear, we cannot and we should not see these historical and very close proximity in any issues as this is really an opportunity for us. The second part, specifically focusing to the COVID, we very much appreciate the initiation of the Prime Minister of India for organizing this video conference of the SAARC leaders on 15th of March, and also starting to establish the COVID emergency fund, and also helping to the neighbors. And Nepal got some sort of support, not only in the medical supplies, but also the exchange and collaboration with the health professional to deal with this pandemic. The border issue was one of our common challenge during the time of the pandemic, and there we were also working very closely. These are really very appreciable issues, particularly related to the disease is concerned. But still we need to do further on that, because this open border issue and the pandemic case will be continue for how long we don't know. So there we have to have very clear model of collaboration, how we can tackle that, because virus doesn't recognize Indian or Nepali or this side or that side. So we have to be very cautious and plan that in a collaborative way so we can deal. Regarding the impact of the COVID, economic, tourist, and in many other sectors, that was very clearly outlined by Ambassador Ray. I fully agree on that, but this impact, perhaps the skill might be different, the coping ability will be different, but the impact will be for the both country. And large number of the Nepali migrant working in India, and equally large migrant of the Indian are working in Nepal, because we have the open border and we are entertaining them. So that issue we have to address and we have to amicably resolve, and that is only possible through the very close engagement, debate, discussion, and identifying the collective solution. So regarding this COVID, still we need to do a lot collectively, and we are very happy that India is supporting us wherever we can. We will also support. So it's a mutual in many respects. It's not only issue of the financial, but also issue of the more mutuality in other respect other than the financial part. That is one part. The other important part is the Indo-Nepal relation reflected particularly at that time is the issue we raised about the boundary and settlement, because we are border, that's why we will have the border related issues and border related problem. That is obvious, but the way how we want to handle it and how we want to solve it is the important element. And one dimension earlier also Ambassador Chinoy and also the Ambassador Ray highlighted that there is some sort of perception in both countries, not only in India and Nepal, but not only in Nepal what you observe, but also India. As a researcher, I have documented few of the perception of Nepali towards India and Indian towards Nepal. For example, always India, particularly the media, is looking that Nepal is aligned to China and playing China card and taking one specific incidents and generalizing that. At least that I didn't see in that way, because we are between the two countries and we have to deal with the countries with our own uniqueness, because India, we have so many specialities, and China, we have other realities. So we have to deal on that. Equally, the Nepal is small, of course, and we have relative political instability compared to India, but also there is equal criticism to the India. So this internal politics, always referring to the nationalism, may not be that fair in my understanding, and that is very commonly we are observing. And also the trying to play with the internal politics by any external forces will not help to the region, to the countries, at least to the neighbors. So this aspect is also coming very prominently when I look to the media, when I look to the commentary, etc. But if every scholar or every practitioner or every media person or whoever wants to go through the negative route, we can find numerous negative points to argue, but this will not help the problem. As both of the earlier speaker very clearly said, we have to look for the solution. So if we want to look to the solution, we have to look for the options. Of course, the past incidences and past events give us the lesson. But if we entangle to the past and if we are always bound there, it may not help. So that is another perspective I want to debate, discuss, and share with you. The reality is that India wants to be the regional and global leader, and for that, if India wants to be the global leader, it is always important for India to also look and collaborate with the neighboring countries and make them stable, help them to make stable, help them to work more collaboratively, and confrontation will not give any solution at all. So in that context, because I see there are so many fundamental bases for India-Nepal cooperation, even if I look to the only two statements. For example, when the Prime Minister Modi was coming to Nepal in 2014 and he gave the speech in the Constituent Assembly, and at that time Nepali people were so happy and so appreciated, and he was highlighting so many interdependencies, the role of the Gorkha regiment, the role of the religion, the role of the exchange, the water, roti beti, rishta, all these issues he was very nicely highlighting, and this can be the point of departure for the relation. Equally, former Prime Minister Vajpayee also highlighted the importance of Nepal-India relation, like the higher than Himalayas and deeper than ocean, etc., etc. So what does this mean? What I am arguing here is that we have to work together. We can find the solution. We can find the win-win solution, and that for the win-win solution, the way is only the meaningful engagement, debate, discussion. We have the differences in this boundary issue. Of course, yes, these differences can be settled by sitting the two government representatives, two governments together, and bringing these arguments and counter arguments, evidences there, and discussing. So at least that has to do, and the amicable solution with the win-win result is only through this mutual collaboration and cooperation. For that, at least 5-4 bases are equally important. The mutual respect, that is quite important, and we have to have that basis. And also we can solve through the use of the historical evidences, the treaty documents or maps or letters or memos or agreements or whatever we have exchanged between the two countries. Why not to sit together and examine critically, and then based on that find the solution? So the second principle is that. The third principle is also the use of the modern science and technology to identify any discrepancies in terms of alignment of the river, etc. So there is that knowledge available. Another principle is to use the expert knowledge. India, Nepal, there is such a depository of the knowledge. That knowledge we have to use to explore the options, possible options, to explore the solutions, and then help the negotiator, help the two government to come to the mutual solution. So these are 4-5 basic principles, but all these principles has to be guided by the vision and determination of the leadership, which occasionally observe. If we go and take one particular event or word or a specific case, and probably we will not reach nowhere. We have to have the common broad vision to go together. If South Asia is stable, if neighbors are stable, if neighbors are working properly in a very well relation manner with India, it will be the benefit for India to be a global leader. And if it has a problem in door every time, and it will not help that much. That is how I see. So in that sense, vision and determination of the highest leadership is the both country, and the 4-5 principles, if we work with, which I just laid down, it is possible. It is possible to get the win-win solution and to address mutually, because Nepal and India cannot go for the war. Even if India is how strong it is not the solution for India to go with the war. Nepal has no solution to go with the war. The solution is to engage, meaningfully engage, explore the option, discuss them, and based on that, move ahead. So that is how it has to work, and that will help the way we want to help. And the Indian scholar, Nepali scholar, practitioner, policy makers, there are so many ideas. Professor Muni was also suggesting some of the options. There could be many options if there is a positive atmosphere and debate and discussion, and then the finding option is the second step. The first step is to agree by the highest level to sit together and solve this mutually. Thank you very much. That is what I want to share now, and later we can add.
Thank you very much, Dr. Upreti, for giving us that wise counsel, and also for emphasizing the fact that such issues should always be resolved through bilateral dialogue. As you know, 98% of the border in any case has been resolved through years of hard work by the two sides and strip maps, etc. And there's only a small portion that remains. So therefore, you are advocating something that we can all agree with, that it should be done amicably through dialogue in the future. But one thing did surprise me during my own visit to Nepal, and that's for scholars to address, that there was, and especially at the university, Tribhuvan University, a lot of people seem to express the sentiment that a stronger India, as in economically stronger India, is also viewed as a threat to Nepal. Now that was astonishing. It was something that was staggering in terms of a perception that the rise of India, the economic rise of India, which should actually be welcome, a welcoming phenomenon for all our neighbors, was seen as a threat. And I couldn't quite put it appropriately in my mind in regard to China's astonishing economic rise. That was incidentally not viewed as a threat. And considering that we have such close relations, integration, logistics integration also, previous speakers have referred to imports, exports, etc. And so we are heavily connected. So that was something that I still need to unpack at the academic level. Couldn't quite get that. I felt that there was misunderstanding, perhaps a degree of opinion generated by ideology and ideological connects that transcended the Nepalese political spectrum, going beyond borders as well. That's the impression I got. I now turn to my next speaker, that's Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, who was until very recently our envoy in Kathmandu. Over to you, Ambassador Puri. 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, please, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I want to thank you for convening this webinar, and I am delighted to see my predecessor and my guru, Ambassador Ray, there. I was very happy to hear Surendra Pandey, and I am seeing Abhishek Pratap Singh in the window. So thank you very much for all this. Now, Sujan, I'm the fifth speaker. There really isn't much on the cheat sheet that I can really read out. So I'm going to try and say things a little off the cuff, but in terms of where things currently. Remember, 5 months I haven't been the ambassador. I have no evidence of what the state of play is, etc. First, 2 points which you just mentioned. You mentioned something about the Sugauli Treaty. Let me tell you, it's not the only one that determines Nepal's external boundaries with India. There have been subsequent agreements, but Sugauli is the relevant treaty as regards this Kalabani business. So that's why a lot of conversations on this particular thing. Then just now, there was some conversation which you just mentioned about the rise of India. Look, Sujan, fundamentally speaking, in Nepal, on the blackboard, the whiteboard, or the playboard, whichever word you want to use, India is the only thing. So the darts are only shot there. You're good, you shoot more darts or you shoot less darts. It is my considered opinion that if this playboard goes away, most of them will have a hell of a difficult time even knowing what to do. Look, India and Nepal, our relations are, as Ranjit mentioned, they transcend all of us. They transcend our governments. And they are relations which are civilizational. They are based at the level of people. But I want to tell everyone, please don't underestimate that geographies tend to change, or they can change if great efforts are made to try and change them. And I don't mean physical geographies. Even there, people are building artificial bridges, etc. But if we leave that aside, geographies do change. We've seen this happening in Europe, especially a more extended version of Europe. So we must be mindful. Therefore, for me, the most important point remains in India-Nepal relations. Leverage the old relationships, leverage the connectivity, leverage what we can do, leverage India's economic growth, and try and see what best we can do for the people of both our countries. They really deserve that. Now, let me turn to the current state of play. The coronavirus pandemic. Look, it is a huge hit for the whole world. But let me say this, that it's a massive hit, not just in terms of numbers of cases and deaths, where South Asia and India and Nepal particularly may have been spared the very, very high figures. But what we are looking to in terms of our economies is extremely worrisome. And this is a time when the two economies need to try and see what can you do to ameliorate things, how can you try and take things forward. It's the last time when you need to be talking about matters which have remained unresolved, will take some time. Of course, there has to be negotiations, there have to be discussions. None of us say that that should not happen. In fact, I am the strongest advocate of all of this. Let me tell you something about Nepal and what the corona pandemic could do. Some 30% of Nepal's GDP comes from remittances. I don't know if many people are aware, but Nepal is the 5th most dependent country on remittances after Tonga, Haiti, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Do you know what is happening in the countries which are the major source of remittance to Nepal? These are the Gulf countries. These are countries in Southeast Asia and India. In every place, there is a looming and in fact a large possibility of major economic issues. So it's not just that the monies would stop coming and the entire infrastructure built up in the last 20 years around Nepal, essentially around the monies which have come in from remittances, would go, but the people would come back. Now think about what would happen in these kind of situations. India is a super large country. With a billion plus population, we have always been Atam Nirbhar in that sense. We have to look after ourselves. No one's going to look after 17% of humankind. We know what to do. But for Nepal, I think this is a time of serious introspection and thinking by the political leadership. If you have 2/3 majority or almost 2/3 majority, it behoves upon you even more to be focused on how to manage this particular challenge, because the challenge is not of a small order at all. And I'm not referring to tourism, I'm not referring to all those things. Those are all incidental, but the remittance business is of a huge and massive scale. Indeed, if I end this particular point, COVID might just negate for Nepal the huge gains over the last 20 years from globalization. Now, in the last 20 years, Nepal has also changed. All of us know the change, that it's no longer a monarchy, but a federal democratic republic. But it has changed in some other ways too. One of the things in which it has changed hugely is urbanization. Nepal had no large city some 20, 25 years back. Today, Kathmandu certainly counts as one of the largest cities in Asia, which certainly makes it a huge, big urban agglomeration. And the problems of that really need to be sorted out. India's situation is vastly different from that, also considering our colonial background and so on and so forth. Thirdly, let us understand that in Nepal, the kind of political change that you've had is a political change which has empowered a very large number of people. Indeed, it is my considered belief that the average Nepali is more empowered politically than we are in India, because we are a large country. More than 1 million people elect a member of parliament. In Nepal, it's much closer. The sense of empowerment, the feeling that it's yours tends to be much more. And so consequently, the reaction of people and the scope and space available for leaderships to be able to maneuver also becomes much more constrained and limited. And therefore, I believe very strongly that this is a time for Nepalese leaderships to really coalesce about looking at how to manage and how to take things forward. And in this, I believe, without any doubt, no matter the issue of China, no matter other geopolitics in the world, the fact that today Nepal has nearly, what should I say, about 20% of its population overseas, all the way from the Americas to Australasia. No matter all of that, it is this relationship with India which gives them a sense of, what should I say, hinterland, a kind of space in which to be able to operate. And this is a time when this relationship needs to be looked at and needs to be furthered and in fact leveraged for possibilities as regards Nepal. Now, we all understand that there is a changing Nepal. There's also a changing India. And I very much believe that in India also we have not been keeping track of the changing Nepal, just in the same way as Nepal possibly has not been keeping much track of the changing India. And so we really need to, what should I say, sharpen our own approaches, think a little differently, but think positively in terms of leveraging the great people-to-people relationships and what geography and history has given us all. Now, let me say a few things about the current business. Look, when I was ambassador there, and sometime towards the second half of last year, when we released the new political map of India, there were demonstrations in Nepal. It took some of us a little bit of time to figure out as to what has happened. It's an internal political map in India. And we had these demonstrations. Thereafter, things cooled down, a little bit of understanding was there, and then matters have once again risen. Now, it's all very well to say that these are matters that have to be resolved, and I fully agree and underscore very strongly that we have to sit down, talk about it. And I don't want to talk in terms of here are the menu of options, you can tick mark one and find a solution. These are problems that have to be talked about, thought through. People have to have a buy-in. Political leaders have to have a buy-in. If you see the latest map that Nepal, the new map of Nepal, which has been released, it's a map which even encompasses areas which the administrative map of Nepal, which even finds a place in its national symbol, was not there. And the kilometerage is not a small 1 or 2 kilometers, it's a very large chunk of territory. Now, we can have discussions on all of these matters, but we need to go through these. And I must tell you, look at some of the historical records going back to Sugauli 1817, discussions noted by the British, who really did all the surveys for everyone. There's hardly any doubt that these areas were truly Indian. But I want to leave that aside. I simply want to say that in the context of India-Nepal, we should be mindful that words, tone, and tenor are important. And it's not just the tone and tenor. What are the words used in the tone and tenor? It is one thing to think that you can say what you want. There are various aspects. Please look at it this way. Be magnanimous. All that is fine. And I have no doubt that India has always done that and will continue to do that. But people do listen. And lastly, let me make this point to you. Nepal has prided itself with the huge growth of social media. Everyone's got a smartphone. Lots of people have Twitter, Instagram accounts. They're all going on chatting on all kinds of things. Well, India has seen an exponential growth in social media. Let me tell you that what is now happening in Nepal is not unnoticed among the people of India. And I worry about that. I worry that when things go beyond just two governments, where you can have disagreements, you can have even a certain degree of anger, but people like us go there, or our leaders and political leaders, and then come out and say, okay, we'll meet next time and do something. At the level of people, you tend to do things which should not be done, and should not be done because this is a geography that is absolutely worth maintaining. Now, Sujan, somewhere in the beginning, I think someone mentioned about borders. I want to tell you that India-Nepal border, which is an open and free border of about 1,800 kilometers, has given to the two countries and the people something for which the European Union, which prides itself as the bastion of having done everything for its people, 50 years to give a free and open border, people going across taking advantage. Now, Ambassador Ray pointed out to difficulties that people are having there. Of course, they are having there, but this is due to quarantine and health quarantine reasons. We understand what is going on. But let me also tell all those chaps who talk in terms of, the borders and so on and so forth. What have the last 2 months been as lessons learned? And I don't think those lessons learned can be great. I want to emphasize that collaboration, leveraging societal links, leveraging civilizational links, leveraging the economic opportunities, especially the growing India, already among the 5 largest economies in the world, certainly set to be among the 3 largest economies in the world. For Nepal, we are an automatic plus. Everybody in Nepal, from the small shopkeeper to the largest industrialist, knows us better than we possibly know ourselves. And this is an opportunity for them to take and continue to take advantage of various treaties, agreements, etc., which always allow different sovereignties a certain amount of greater advantage than what you sometimes even tend to give within your own country to various people. These things happen, and that's particularly important. So I want to stop now. I am willing to take all kinds of questions, whatever. I'm seeing several of them. I think there is a need for everyone, Sujan, to be very cognizant that India not just looms large, but is the playboard against which politics and indeed much of society in that part of society, which is the dominant society of Nepal, the dominant communities of Nepal, India is that playboard. Hence, we also need to be prepared for that. We need to understand a changing Nepal, but Nepal also needs to understand a changing India and use the historical links for leveraging things for a betterment of our people on both sides. I think we owe it to our.
Thank you, Manjeev. Thank you, Manjeev. You've spoken characteristically in a very frank and candid manner. You did not hesitate to make your views known, and I appreciate the candor with which you addressed the audience. You spoke of leveraging convergences, and I think everybody would agree that we should be doing that. Also, to avoid, playing to the gallery, rabble rousing, playing to the gallery does not help, because it creates a false sense of hubris and nationalism, and sometimes that is uncalled for, because it reduces the space in which diplomacy is supposed to be given a chance to address outstanding issues. So that's very, very valid what you said, very wise counsel. And at the end of the day, of course, no country should engage in any unilateral action or have an attitude of, wanting to have the cake and eat it too. I'm also a bit worried that India always, as you seem to suggest, regardless of what we do, will end up in the crosshairs. And it's a permanent kind of, punching bag. But that's something that's not very rational. And I think we owe it to the broader communities on both sides, as researchers, as the strategic community, to try and devise ways and means to overcome these hurdles. I now turn to our next speaker, that is Dr. Bindu N. Lohani, former Vice President of the Asian Development Bank, who has also joined us 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Lots have been said on how essential it is to have an excellent relation, especially with the neighbors. And bilateral relations and bilateral cooperations are so important. I don't need to say this is just a motherhood statement. Well, I like the word bilateral cooperation over bilateral relation. Coming from a regional development bank where I spent 30 years. But in my past experience, I witnessed that in many cases, the bilateral cooperation has also to be looked at, and sometimes even more effective to look at, from sub-regional and regional cooperation, and sometimes even global, depending on the issues. We talk about the impact of the COVID, and there is information all over. The countries are now at the stage of handling the relief, recovery, economic recovery, and how to rebound the economy in the next 2-3 years. I think the time has come for India-Nepal cooperation to view, not from the perspective of the politics, or I will say not only, or less, maybe from the perspective of the politics, rather or more through the eyes and lens of economic cooperation. In the same spirit, I also say that the Nepal-China cooperation should also be viewed through the eyes of economic cooperation. So how do we do that? Well, I spent 30 years looking at the sub-regional program in the region, and I have some experience and I'd like to share. I feel that, and I want to say this boldly, it's timely to establish India-Nepal-China economic cooperation program. My emphasis is in the word economic. In the past, I'm aware of some of big countries, especially the big countries, who didn't like this sub-regional cooperation. They thought everything could be done bilaterally, but this is only in Southeast Asia. But if you go to Southeast Asia, we got Vietnam talking to Laos, a 5 million people country, much, much smaller. And the ASEAN model, and there are many models, the big countries and small countries, really, they like to be together in a sub-regional mode. So I feel, therefore, establish the India-Nepal-China economic cooperation. Anything that Nepal does with China, the other side doubts. And as rightly said by the Ambassador Puri before, there's so much in the media, people perception, they don't have the real facts. Therefore, time has changed, and I hope the mindset that changed so that such a tri-country economic cooperation program could exist. There are many successful examples in the region. Let me mention a few. The ASEAN, the 10 countries, it works beautifully. You know, it's the next to EU, next best model to EU. The ASEAN plus 3, which is 3 means Japan, Korea, and China, and they were so useful at the time of the Asian financial crisis and the global financial crisis. The Greater Mekong sub-region, 6-country cooperation, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and China. China, only part of China which becomes relevant for regional cooperation, only about 2 provinces. The CAREC, the Central Asian countries, they can think of building a pipeline from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan to India and Pakistan. I mean, they can think, and there are BIMSTEC, BBN, etc., which I have really attended over the past. And the South Asian Economic Cooperation and the sub-regional cooperation in Southeast Asia, and it really makes me feel really bad. I'm from South Asia. Is the weakest of all the sub-regional cooperation that we have seen in the region. We got to reflect on why. To me, the Greater Mekong sub-region is a good model for the India-Nepal-China cooperation. Let's call INC. It can be built on the 4 pillars based on what we have seen in the Asia Pacific region. 1, connectivity and infrastructure development, such as the cross-border connectivity, water, energy, transport, etc. 2nd pillar, the trade facilitation and investment and integration. For example, regional trade, both bilateral and multilateral. The third pillar, monetary and financial cooperation and integration, exchange rate, currency swap, as was mentioned before. And the fourth pillar, cooperation in regional public goods and others. This is where they talk about environment, climate change. They talk about the labor migration, the human trafficking, drug trafficking, communicable disease. We use this forum in Southeast Asia at the time of SARS, and they're talking at the time of COVID now. So we don't have something like this. So I think it will be nice to have a permanent. I emphasize the word permanent because we only talk when the issues come in. We only start looking at it when issues flare up. But these kind of institutions exist in Southeast Asia. They're talking regularly. They're discussing based on the strength of the study, based on the facts, figures, not on the propaganda, as was mentioned before, so that people are misled through the social media sometime. It has to be regularly. The energy people should meet, the technical people should meet, the diplomats should meet at various levels, sectoral level, policy level, minister level, and once in a couple of years, head of the state level, depending upon the issue. This has worked beautifully. But you also need a very strong secretariat, which can act as the honest broker. And that's the problem. If two countries start discussing on their own, and there's a different view, who is the honest broker? In the case of Greater Mekong Sub-region, the ADB became the honest broker, and all of them are the members anyway of the Asian Development Bank, and it also brought in money. The reason I say money, because all of these studies, meetings, etc., requires lots of money and requires a lot of time and patience. And therefore, in the case of ASEAN, however, they decided that they will chip in themselves and make this fund available. To end, my submission today is we need a sub-regional program in Asia. It has shown that it can work if the countries can really, at the highest level, put the trust on it. It has built trust in Southeast Asia countries which used to fight. They had wars in the past. They don't even talk anything like that anymore. They have regular meetings, have resolved issues as they come in rather than they accumulate. The experts become the knowledge people to help on this process. They had avoided many conflicts, and they have resulted many, many wind projects, like someone building a hydropower in Laos, bringing to Thailand, Malaysia putting a transmission line to Indonesia, the TAPI that I mentioned. I think you have to be talking to each other over and over. I have been part of these meetings over my many years, and people can just take a phone and call, hey friend, there's an issue, how do we solve it, before even it gets out to the media. I therefore strongly feel time has come for us to have the India-Nepal China Economic Cooperation. I know it's difficult, some people will hate it, not like it, but it is not also an easy start. But I think it should be seriously looked at based on my days in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you very much. This is my 9 minutes presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lohani, for actually conceding 1 minute from your time and for also giving us an overview of regional economic cooperation and potential avenues for the future. I now turn to our next speaker, Professor Mahendra P. Lama of the Center for South Asian Studies at JNU. He will be speaking on economic aspects of India-Nepal relations. The floor is yours. 10 minutes, please. Let's just try and stick to the time now, because I can see that we are running out of time. We've overshot. And in the chat box, there are so many questions that I will really need to bring you all in once again to address those queries. So 10 minutes, please. Thank you. Professor Lama, can you hear me? Professor Mahendra P. Lama, please, the floor is yours. Webmaster, do we have him on our webinar?
Yes, sir, we have him, sir.
I can see that he's there, and he must be hearing us as well. Professor Lama, please unmute your mic and address us for 10 minutes. All right. If someone, Ashok, if you have Professor Lama's mobile number, please try and reach out to him. Meanwhile, I will turn to Dr. Govinda Raj Pokharel, former VC, Nepal Planning Commission. Professor Dr. Pokharel, the floor is yours, 10 minutes. We will bring in Professor Lama after you. And meanwhile, someone will connect with him on the mobile and reach out. There must be some technical reason here.
Okay, good afternoon, investors and all colleagues, PG. And also, I saw that my best friend Ranjit was an investor in Nepal. And,
could you come closer to your mic, please? There is a little rumbling sound, but I cannot explain that. It must be some technical reason, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I welcome Ranjit and Manjeev Sri Puri, and I sometimes also I frequently meet ST Muni in different seminars. I'm not a diplomat, and I'm also not talking about the diplomatic relation between India and Nepal, but I'm talking about the possible economic collaboration between Nepal and India, because we have many opportunities to build our relationship if we do more homework on this investment sector. As you know that when I was in Planning Commission, we tried to bring huge investment in Upper Karnali, Arun Third, and Fast Track. Because once you see the both countries are utilizing potential that we have in hydropower, we have in infrastructure, and we have in especially in manufacturing and production industries. It will create lots of job and economic opportunities that will certainly help to understand both of us. I mean, in India and Nepal. And also, we should also think about the building the capacity of Nepalese institutions. Although I myself did my study in India. Hello, some disturbance.
I'm afraid I have to request all non-speakers to kindly take a quick look at their screens to ensure that they are muted. And may I also request Webmaster or Ashok to reach out to Professor Lama. Now I can see that it's been muted now, because we're going to slot him in after this current speaker. So that job being done, please continue.
So then we have a huge opportunity, as I said, to have production industry, manufacturing industry, and to link this supply chain and global value chain with India and Nepalese industry. And also we can have like some sort of green product that we can produce in Nepal by utilizing clean energy. And with our great effort now, already the energy trade between India and Nepal is taking place. Last year alone, Nepal at least earned around 20 crore of Nepali rupees by selling electricity to India. So if we encourage these types of investment, these types of economic relationship between two countries, I think that will help to address other political issues and diplomatic issues. And second thing I want to highlight is the building the capacity of Nepalese institutions and people. Like I was already telling that I did my engineering from India. There are many people who have done their studies in India, but going back to like the if you want to have some policy reform like India is doing, India is bringing lots of FDIs and so on, but we have many hurdles still in Nepal. So if we can also help in that aspect, so that Nepalese institution can reform themselves with the support from India, then attract more, at least Indian investment. That will also create some sort of better environment between two countries. I know that when the earthquake happened, then we got some expert support from India, like thanks to the Ranjit Ray, and we prepared this post-disaster needs assessment with the support from Indian expert, which was highly appreciated by other developing partners and countries as well. So, and during that time, we saw that our relation was so, good, and everybody has appreciated. That's a sort of support in building the capacity of institutions and Nepalese different government and non-government sector is also required. And I see there are some challenges like in understanding, although I said I'm not a diplomat person, but I see the Indian concern is especially on the security, and India is growing economically. There are certain vulnerability on its own security. So Nepal has to respect that, I think. And second, Nepal also needs like some sort of mutual respect, although physically, economically, it is a small country, but it should, I mean, get respect like it has been getting since ages, because our relation is not only defined in 1947, but we have the relations like cultural, religious, it's ages-old relations. I can mention like since King Bharat, when he went to meditate in Kali Gandaki. That's why and then also Nepal needs some support because it's a landlockedness. Nepal wants to have some spillover benefit, or like India is growing, we want to have some economic benefit out of that, which will also help us to have better relationship. Then what I think, apart from like talking, coming to the table, secretary, there are track to channels like academicians, media, ex-ambassadors, people to people, and also more important is business to business. That will even enhance our relationship. That's why what I see, the diplomatic relation is one side, but if you have a business to business relationship, that will also enhance our collaboration and cooperation and also better understanding. So I just wanted to highlight that let's focus on also business and economic cooperation, bringing investment in Nepal, supporting, doing some reforms so that Nepal gets more investment. These aspects will also help to strengthen our relation. And coming back to some comments, what I saw that you don't highlight one incident, what happened, I mean, 2-3 days before in Parliament when Prime Minister says something dishonestly. What I say, I don't support the language that he used. And that is not the incident that you try to define India and Nepal relationship. And that is not the correct way of doing. Okay, thank you. I just want to stop this here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Govinda Raj Pokharel, for also emphasizing the importance of strengthening our bilateral economic relations. I will now request Professor Mahendra Lama to take the floor and to address us for 10 minutes. Professor Lama, I can see you. Can you please unmute your mic? Please unmute your mic and address us for 10 minutes. Yes, you are on. You're on now. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Chinoy. Economic growth situation, particularly in Nepal, being a small landlocked country, is pretty bad at the moment, because depending upon the situation of coronavirus, I think if it prolongs for long, there's a possibility that the growth rate would be pretty negative in case of Nepal, and it would be a kind of a U-shaped growth rate, not a V-shaped growth rate, because the remittances, the exports, investments, tourism have all very badly suffered. And the very composition of the GDP in Nepal, where you have a huge contributions of the tertiary sector, where remittances figure very, very eminently, and very small contribution of the manufacturing sector, shows that Nepal is going to be going to have a very high degree of vulnerability. And if it prolongs, then there could be some kind of instability. You know, somehow I don't like the way India-Nepal border is compared to India-China border. There's nothing to compare between India-China border and India-Nepal border. India-Nepal border is symbolic of deep-rooted, comprehensive, dynamic, interdependent relationship, right? And where for us, India-Nepal border is a lot of things: physical movement of people, policy interactions. You know, if something happens on this side on inflation, it will be affected in Nepal. Once politically, we should really compare India and Nepal border with India and China border. we can compare India and China, India and Nepal border with Chinese border only to the extent that how the border in the north has affected both India and Nepal in a different sense, besides the political relationship of Nepal with China. Say, for example, we have noticed, particularly in this case, the gene piracy that takes place, the smuggling of wild animals, the invasive biodiversity that has direct effect on India and Nepal. And in the eminent persons group, we did discuss issues related to cross-border environmental injuries, cross-border health injuries, particularly pandemic issues like pandemic. But this situation gives us a very very open and a kind of a much larger platform for transforming India-Nepal relations. The initiative has already been taken by the 2018 Ministry of Powers, the cross-border energy trading document, which now really opens up trade between India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Nepal as far as energy is concerned. But on the trade front, I see there is still a huge problem related to balance of trade issues, phytosanitary measures, transborder, what you call non-tariff barriers. From the Indian side, we said that there is a huge trade deflection. Export base of Nepal is poor. Nepal resorts to tariff hopping. There are so many fly-by-night operators, right? But the crux of the issue is in 1960, we discussed about common market. So today, we have to really transform the relationship between India and Nepal by bringing issues related to common market, and that would to a large extent resolve what we have investment and trade relations, problems of investment and trade. And if you are able to relate this common market issues with BBIN, the Actist policy of India, the SASEC program, sub-regional programs of Asian Development Bank, that would bring a great deal of transformations and long-term economic sustainability. The second issue which I foresee is Nepal is going to have a serious problem as far as hard currency is concerned in the coming months, both because its exports has gone down drastically and remittances have also gone down drastically. Whereas import finance, it requires import finance in a big way. So where is the scope for India and Nepal to come together on this? We have a historically strong currency pegging between Indian currency and the Nepalese currency, and it has been economically tested, financially sound, and historically well established. There is a one-to-one relationship between what happens in India if there is some kind of devaluations or depreciations, and what happens to the Nepalese currency vis-a-vis such kind of things. So therefore, in the context that you have some kind of depegging debate going on in Nepal, precisely because someone would like to propagate third country currency there in Nepal, like in China, Myanmar trade. I think we need to be moving fast in this direction to consolidate this relationship. The RBI in India and the Nepal Rashtra Bank must come together to really do something big as far as is concerned. The third point I would like to say is this pandemic situation brings us to a major point of discussion related to health. So far we discussed exchange of doctors, patients, all kinds of things. But today, the situation demands that we must exchange extensively on issues of medicines, on issues of science, technology, R&D facilities between India and Nepal, and of course, large-scale Indian pharmaceutical companies, like in mountain areas in Himachal Pradesh, in Sikkim, they have gone and established so resourceful centers, the manufacturing centers, they could go to Nepal. My last point is, of course, migration. It is going to be a very sensitive issue, but also an opportunity issue. If you just see 20 years back, when the Maoist movement happened, there was a large-scale movement of migrants from Nepal to India because of displacement in Nepal. Not many migrants could be absorbed in a city like Kathmandu or even in Pokhara. So one could say India absorbed the shock of conflict in Nepal in a very, very big way by really accommodating and absorbing migrants, displaced migrants from Nepal. But this time, situation is a little serious because, as Karl Marx calls it, reserve army. There are reserve army. They will be on both sides of the borders. UP, West Bengal, Bihar on our side, and almost number of bordering provinces on this side. So this calls for federal unit to federal unit relationship in a much, much comprehensive manner. Our state in UP, Bihar, West Bengal coming together and work with Nepalese on that side. And also this also calls for what you call is more modern without, of course, disturbing the basic character of our open border. This is very, very vital, Ambassador. Then I think the gist point I would like to mention is, I think instead of doing traditional orthodox pattern of having relationship of that nature, why not we have some kind of transformative matrices, basically big issues of relationship between India and Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lama, for those very enlightening comments. You referred very briefly to the India-Nepal border and the Nepal-China border and the differences at the beginning of your presentation. It kind of struck me that one big difference, of course, is that our border is completely open between us and Nepal in many ways. And the border between Nepal and China often is quite closed. In other words, for instance, with regard to, let's say, Tibetan refugees, in recent years, even Human Rights Watch have come out with reports of the kind of cooperation that Nepal has engaged in to ensure that Tibetan refugees are turned away at the border, some kind of greater surveillance and pushback policies and all that. So yes, there are clearly differences between these two borders. Ours has been open not only to Nepal, but even in the past to Tibetan refugees that came in. Where I visited Tibet many years ago, but I do have a sense of what the common man on the ground in Tibet felt about Nepal. There was a certain deep sense of resentment at that policy also. I'm sure scholars are familiar with these feelings across that border also. May I now turn to the Honorable Abhishek Pratap Shah, Member of Parliament of Nepali Congress. He is going to address us for the next 10 minutes. We have two more speakers, including him. After him, it will be Dr. Nihar Nayak, and then we'll have a Q&A session as long as you are comfortable. If you don't mind it encroaching a bit into your lunch hour, then we'll try and finish as many questions as possible, because it's an incredibly valuable opportunity to speak to friends, among friends, heart to heart, and this is the way to go. So please feel free to express your sentiments and feelings because we think it is very helpful. The floor is yours, please, Honorable Abhishek Pratap Shah.
Thank you, Excellency Chinoy, and I would like to thank IDSA as well as IIDA, Mr. Casey, and eminent people here at the webinar. I've listened many people, and a lot of new thing has come up. But being a politician, I'm not an academician. I'm not a professor or something like that. But being a politician, for Nepal, there are certain things which has to be addressed by India, and there are some. I must say that there are some practical problems what normal Nepalese have been facing through ages. So this nationalism issue, it keeps coming and going. You must have known that when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, he imposed a sanction over the borders of Nepal and India. So there was a kind of anti-Indian sentiment in Nepal, and then there was a blockade done by the Madhesi parties. But then many people said that it was a blockade done by the India. So there was a kind of nationalism movement here in Nepal. And again, this Kala Pani Lipu Lake issue has come up. So I have a little, I have a very little knowledge about what Lipu Lake Kala Pani is all about, because until unless I have a proper research on it, I am not going to say anything on it. But it should be handled diplomatically and in a very practical manner. I just want to point out some main points. For example, this COVID-19 crisis is a global crisis, and so a country like US, country like India, a country like Spain, many countries they've been facing a lot of troubles, and of course even Nepal is also going to face that trouble because numbers are getting high every day. What I can see, the main problem is due to this COVID-19 crisis is that youth unemployment. A lot of people from abroad, from India, are coming back to Nepal. But where are the jobs? The government doesn't have a proper infrastructure for those people to give them a proper job. And also the market is very small. So I can see a lot of youth unemployed inside our country from maybe if you see after 4 or 5, 6 months, a lot of people are coming from outside, from India, so they will be unemployed, and that will create a kind of chaotic atmosphere in Nepal. Of course, the second is the food grain crisis. Our agriculture is so the amount of reserve what Nepal government has, or the total production of Nepal's agriculture, can only sustain for about 6 to 7 months. So for what for about 4 or 5 months that shortage, So I think this food grain crisis will also come up, and that will be a very major crisis for Nepal. And of course, economic slowdown has started everywhere, even country like India is facing that, and of course Nepal will also face that. And I just want to say that there should be a balanced relationship in between both the neighbors, and balanced relationship. As I just want to emphasize on that we should have more Indian Institute of Medical Sciences in Nepal on a very joint venture scheme, or medical institutes in Nepal with the help of India, and both the researchers can, both the people from India and Nepal can actually take advantage of that, joint research, etc. And there was a motor vehicle agreement in between Nepal and India when Professor Ray was here. Excellency Ranjit Ray was here in Nepal. There was a motor vehicle agreement in between Nepal and India, and still it's not been it's not been promulgated by the India side. So a lot of people are getting insecure that what the future is going to happen. Normal Nepali, they don't want to have a bad relations with India. See, this government, the communist government, has a lot of problem inside their own party. Mr. Oli, the Prime Minister himself, is left alone inside his party. And if you must have heard that some weeks back, he was all alone in his headquarter meeting. So the Prachand faction was very, very strong inside that meeting. So he started, creating a kind of environment that he could sustain his power as long as possible. So, and there was a tweet from Mr. Rajnath Singh that he inaugurated the road from connecting from Lipu Lake to Mansarovar Yatra. So that actually ignited this issue. And again, this nationalism or the nationalist issue has started, and there was a new map here in Nepal, and many people are worried what's going to happen, and there was a press release from Indian Foreign Ministry. So I think that normal Nepalis, the people residing at the Tarai or at the hills or at the Himalayas or the Himalayan region, say they don't want to have a bad relations with India, because our I mean, roti beti and all those things are, of course, with that, but we are, we are economically dependent upon India, and we want to have a better relations with India. This is what the main thrust of the common people here is, and I reside at the border. I know what are the border problems. A lot of people crossing the borders, where they face problem in India. A lot of people crossing Nepal and coming inside Nepal, they have a lot of problem in Nepal. So we actually have the practical, knowledges what these people are facing the problems, and I think cultural values of both the countries is very important. India and Nepal share a very cultural values, whereas the Nepal and China have a very less cultural values. The sharing basically. The culture plays a very vital role, and just because of this culture, I think India has an edge over China. But being a Nepal, being a landlocked country, and having boundaries with China and India, I think Nepal will have to have a balanced relationship with India as well as with China. I think that was my last point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shri Abhishek Pratap Shah, for your very mature comments. One thing struck me. You spoke about education, and there was a reference to it in your presentation. Now, I understand from my own 2 visits to Nepal, and I'm just chipping in. There was a suggestion that India should set up more Kendriya Vidyalayas and Indian schools in Nepal. Currently, there are only about 12 Indian schools operating in Nepal. And it's quite clear that the Nepalese prefer to send their children to Indian schools for all the reasons that you just mentioned, because we are so close culturally. But on the other hand, there were people who highlighted that Nepalese bureaucrats do not cooperate with Indian investors in the education sector, and they often harass Indians who are trying to set up schools in Nepal. The earlier arrangement of having Hindi teachers and Indian teachers in Nepal has also been scrapped. Of course, there is the related matter of Nepalese saying that nowadays fees for Nepalese students in India has been doubled. They are required to pay in dollars. Even the fees in AIMS, is high, and that has been raised. Short point here is that Nepal has also scrapped the Mahindra scholarship, which was being given for encouraging research on Nepali culture by Indian students. Now, why have we come to this stage where we are actually discouraging that connect between our youth, which comes through the medium of education, whether our people there or your people here? These scholarships are important, and these institutions that we traditionally have had are very important. So I think we need to do some deep thinking. Why Indian institutions are being discouraged in Nepal, and is it the same treatment that is being meted out to, say, the Confucius institutes that teach an entirely different culture and language? Just a thought that struck me. Our last speaker is in fact our resident expert on Nepal, that's Dr. Nihar Nayak, and I request him to take the floor. Nihar?
Sir.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, I am doing, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So there are only 1.5 to 2 million Nepali live in India, and there could be 1 million Indian diaspora living in Nepal. Due to national lockdown since March 24 in India and March 24 in Nepal, laborers from each other countries are in the move towards their hometown. Roughly 40,000 Nepalese have already crossed to Nepal side, from India to Nepal side, and roughly 20,000 Indian laborers have already crossed from Nepal to India side. But many more are still stuck at the border. They are waiting to basically transportation arrangement to be open. So those who are stuck, my major point here is that those who are stuck in India or stuck in Nepal, these laborers are basically facing a lot of challenges. For example, they can't avail basically food facility, they don't have shelter, they don't have any medical facilities. So my point here is basically because of existing 1950 TT, both government of India and government of Nepal could have allowed these laborers basically to avail the social security measures are offered by different governments during this lockdown period. So they can avail that, because the Nepalese, those who are living in India, could not avail because they couldn't produce Aadhaar and voter card or ration card. Similarly, Indians, those who are living in Nepal, they couldn't avail the social security measures offered by Nepali government because they couldn't produce the citizenship card, Nepali citizenship card. So under 1950 arrangement, existing 1950 arrangement, both the government could have basically allowed these laborers to basically to avail these facilities. Number two, Ambassador Rai made a very valuable suggestion, basically how to extend this Vande Bharat mission to basically bring out to Nepalese laborers stuck in Gulf and Southeast Asia. That's a very good suggestion. But my here question is Nepal government ready this kind of cooperation? Because if you see the current policy of Nepal, they have completely locked down their border. Even those Nepalese laborers living in India, they were trying to go to Nepal side, they are not letting them to go inside, because somehow there was some arrangement which was made on March 3rd, because both Nepal and India agreed to take care of each other citizenship stranded on border due to lockdown. And with the decision, local authorities of India and started providing shelter and other facilities. And Nepalese citizens, Nepal side also made a similar arrangement. But somehow, if you see the Nepalese media and even some policy makers, even they have interpreting the entire arrangement in a negative way. For example, as former finance minister said that there is a perception in Nepal that India is denying entry into Nepal. For example, this has been arrangement has been agreed by Nepal government on March 3rd. Even the Prime Minister Oli also called Prime Minister Modi on April 10, and they also agreed on the similar point. But there is a perception in the media, perception in Nepali society just opposite, that India is not denying these laborers to cross to the Nepal side. For example, Nepalese laborers didn't want to stay in quarantine centers because they protested against it. Some of them stayed in the basically no man's land. Some of them even crossed the rivers, also Mohakali River, to reach to the Nepal side. So all this happened because Nepal government refused to accept any kind of Nepal migrant from the India side. And the most unfortunate thing happened basically when Prime Minister Oli in the parliament on record made a statement that those who are coming from India through illegal channel are spreading virus in the country. And that has directly aggravated the entire situation. I mean, India's virus looks more lethal than Chinese and Italian. It was a very unfortunate statement Prime Minister Oli made when he himself agreed on April 10 with the Prime Minister Modi to facilitate these arrangements. So what my last point, I'm just conclude by saying that there should be a policy synchronization and the policy compatibility between Nepal and India when both countries have an open border and huge amount of large number of diaspora living in each other countries. Otherwise, it's difficult to challenge and mitigate this kind of serious pandemic like COVID in future. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nihar. That was rather quick. And I'm glad that you actually kept in mind the fact that we have a Q&A session. So we once again have actually reset the button and we are on time, because 1 to 1:30 in any case was what we had intended for the Q&A and wrap up. I have, as you can see in the chat box, so many essays, observations, questions. In fact, there are more essays than questions. Now, I am doing my own little jugglery here to, pan the gold out of it and, distill it, so to speak. I'm assuming that all speakers have also been monitoring their own chat boxes. But be that as it may, I will make this very game attempt to throw some of the key points at you. Obviously, I cannot name the eminent people who are asking these questions because, again, there are too many. But let me just give these pointers to our speakers, and then I'll do this whole round once again. The first point is that there is this huge anti-India perception in Nepal, and at the same time, to some extent diplomatically and to an even greater extent militarily, we are close. So, Penny, for your thoughts on that. Then the point about the need to review the 1950 Indo-Nepal Treaty. Some people feel that it gives unlimited employment advantages to Nepali youth. At the same time, allows anti-India, tirades to go unhindered alongside, which seems to be like not a very smart way to do things. Then why has Nepal chosen to raise the border issue just when the pandemic is raging? Parallelly, somebody has observed and asked, look, what does this mean for our SAARC cooperation? What Prime Minister Oli has said about the Indian virus being worse than the Chinese virus and all that. And on the other hand, we are trying to, within SAARC, cooperate. And that obviously means India and Nepal must cooperate. Then there is this presumed involvement of, someone has put it plainly, the Chinese envoy to Nepal. These are not my words; these are observations coming from the floor in the situation, and so this has kind of spread to the media and articles and cartoons and things of the sort. How will COVID, the ongoing issue between India and Nepal, will it hamper post-COVID relationship? Not just now, but later. Then let me quickly turn to some more. There is an observation that a number of issues have actually created this kind of dissonance in our ties, and that includes, in the questioner's view, India's opposition to the Nepalese constitution, the blockade, the perceived Indian big brotherly attitude, etc., etc. How come this this change in position has come in so rapidly, so fast? There have been problems between us, but at the same time, we seem to have over time even amicably addressed boundary differences over the decades. But what has caused this to cascade so suddenly? Can someone also give a slightly more detailed historical perspective to the boundary question? It's felt that leasing and swapping is not an out-of-box idea. People have thought of it earlier, and there is also a feeling that it's not really acceptable. So, a penny for your thoughts on that. These unfortunate remarks by the Prime Minister of Nepal, the tone and the tenor came up several times in the course of today's discussions. Now, what does that mean? Now, what do we do next? Because really the whole thing has to be toned down. The world is watching us. The world is watching how Nepal is dealing with India and how India is dealing with Nepal. And after all, we are close friends. Then, do you think the current dispute is a culmination of previous smaller border frictions between the nations? And if so, how can we actually get down to factually deciding the reliability of these historical maps and other ancient documents that we keep talking about? And somewhere in the media, we see that nobody can find the originals in one place or the other. So how do we want to go about this? Do we want to use the current, situation as a takeoff point, or history of yore? Then how do we deal with the media? Because now the media has taken over this discourse, and the dissonance is being spread. It's multiplying. There's a force multiplier effect now, because diplomats and the military and others have close ties. They can sit across, talk to each other, the surveyors, but the discourse has now gone into the public domain. Close relations between Nepal and China, Nepal and Pakistan, how they impact on our bilateral ties. The publication of unilateral, maps, they impact on discussions with India. It's like one has put it, tantamount to throwing a gauntlet. And what does that really mean for the future of our ties? Is the border issue being instigated by a third country? And finally, an observer from Nepal has asked that, look, if India thinks that the recent Nepali activities are all due to the backing of China, then why don't you sit down and deal with this in a trilateral manner? Of course, the answer to that is that if it's a bilateral issue, the question of third-party interference or mediation or presence simply does not arise. But anyway, I'm being honest about what has been thrown up. So now we will go back. It's round robin again. I will begin with the Honorable Mr. Surendra Pandey, but I'm reminded that he actually sent a little message in the chat box saying he had another meeting. And so I'm assuming he has left us by now. He may tell me if he's still there, but I assume he's not there. I'll begin with Ambassador Ranjit Rai. Ranjit, the floor is yours, please. We can keep ourselves confined to a maximum of 2 to 3 minutes. We will overshoot our time a little bit, but that will be well worth it. It will be a rewarding experience. So say about 3 minutes, please, Ranjit. Ambassador Ranjit Rai. Please unmute your mic. Ambassador Ray, please unmute your mic. Your mic, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. You're now audible. Please,
okay.
Please start now.
So thank you, Sujan. I mean, that's a huge bouquet of questions, and I'm really not competent to answer all of them, but just a few. Anti-India perception. I think the answer to that is more intensive engagement with all sections of Nepali society, and especially the youth. You yourself have mentioned schools, more exchange programs, more visits, and these should happen at all levels, at the level of parliaments, at the level of political parties, civil society, media, and especially the youth. Absolutely critical. That is the way we build more trust and understanding. Number two, we have to make sure through our connectivity efforts and through joint projects that Nepal has a stake in India's growth, that Nepal benefits from India's growth prospects and the unleashing of India's growth potential. So, they should really, as Ambassador Shamsaran used to say, look at India as an opportunity and not as a threat. Very, very critical to step up our implementation and to step up our connectivity projects and also our joint projects like the hydro project. I think Govindji referred to Arun 3, which is an excellent example of how this cooperation should proceed. Now, on the issue of the 1950 treaty and the open border, there was an eminent persons group that was established to look at some of these issues. And, they have prepared a report, but for some reason, there has been no further discussion on this report issue. So this can also be, become an irritant. And I really think the government should at least accept the reports. I don't think the recommendations are binding, but the government should accept the reports and then move ahead in terms of, how to deal with some of the recommendations. I mean, we are on record as saying that, we are quite prepared to amend the treaty and we are quite prepared to discuss it. Last point on Kalapani. So you see, historically, as you have mentioned and several others, it's the Mahakali River that determines the boundary between India and Nepal in the western sector. Now, the issue, the controversy is about the source of this river. India says the source is Kalapani, and hence the Sugauli Treaty only defines the India-Nepal boundary up to the point in Kalapani. Now, between Kalapani and the Tibet border, the treaty is silent. And hence, there are other factors that determine the border in that area. What Nepal says is, no, Kalapani is not the source of the Kali River. The source actually is this Limpia, there is some rivulet that emerges from near Nipu Lake.
Kutia Yangti. That's from Limpia Dura. It comes down and connects a little below Kalapani, near Gunji.
And hence, everything east of that river should be with Nepal. One other element in this Kalapani issue is that now with this road that we have constructed, most of our pilgrims that go to Kailash Mansarovar Yatra will now use this route. So Nepal is also going to suffer in terms of tourism earnings, because so far a lot of Indians used to go via Nepal. And I think that aspect, that will be to the detriment of Nepal in financial terms. And, that issue has not been raised, but that is, one of the issues that may be at the back of their mind. So the broad point I want to make is, yes, there will be issues between neighboring countries, and these issues have to be resolved through dialogue and discussion. And I think it's important that we resume this process of dialogue and discussion at the soonest. That's the way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ray. The next speaker is Dr. Bishnu Raj Upreti. A couple of minutes for your thoughts, please. Pick and choose what you wish to comment on.
Thank you, sir. Very quickly, the first and most important issue in the entire question is to accept that EPG report by the two government and look what is there and how they can be taken further. As Ambassador Ray very precisely said, it's a report. The decision has to be with the both governments, so they can sit together and work out. And in this report, many of the issues raised here are also dealt in. So the best way will be to accept the EPG report, to sit together to both government and then discuss further and sort out. And regarding this Kalapani issue, because here in Nepal, we are quite concerned, and also the many scholars, academics, researchers are bringing different evidences. So perhaps the same has been done in the India as well. And then based on these, and whether we have original or not, even we can find with the documents where they are, maybe in the British Library or the Library of American Congress or wherever, whatever material that is. But what I see, only with the historical document may not work, but the most important is, again I said, combination of few of the elements, the science and technology, the GIS system to identify the proper source defined at that time. So because when the media take it in a very selective way with a particular issue and then exemplify without going to the deeper, it will only escalate the situation. So the most important for me as a researcher working in the conflict management and dispute settlement, what I realized, sitting together and working on the core of the issue, not with the position, not with the individual, but with the issue, it will really help. And there we have to start with. Thank you.
You made a wonderful point. I think it's very important to take this dissonance out of the public and media spectrum. It has to go back into where it belongs, which is the world of diplomacy, the world of the experts, the world of the scholars that do deep research and make recommendations, and above all, in the case of the territorial issue, to the surveyors, etc. Otherwise, in the public domain or in the media, we can continue to discuss whether it's Kutia Yangti or whether it is the Lipu Khola, Lipu Ghad, or whether really after Kalapani it veers off to the, northeast towards the watershed till the cows come home, and we will get nowhere. So let's leave it to experts. And that's the whole idea. People have to sit together, connect, do more research, and in the meanwhile, refrain from taking unilateral action. I turn now very quickly to Ambassador Manjeev. Manjeev, the floor is yours, please.
Let me say and repeat what I said. This COVID pandemic is not just another something that has happened, small time and it'll get over. Let us be a little more serious. It has debilitating impact possibilities on the economy, in particular the economy of Nepal. Therefore, a far greater understanding and greater maturity is needed rather than this laundry list of things that we should be doing that we are talking about. There can be immediate next few months and few years serious problems as far as Nepal is concerned, and India is obviously the best and perhaps the only placed institution and economy that can at least provide some degree of balm. Second point, look, these identity issues, etc., are extremely ingrained as far as Nepal is concerned, and these simple answers are not going to sort any of these things out. But I think it is particularly important that A, the temperatures should be reduced, and more than that, the kind of provocation, whether in whatever form, to score domestic political points or whatever, these should certainly be lowered. You know, it's all very well for us to say that everything should come back to the diplomats, etc. In today's day and age, especially in democracies, we live where people are important, and that particular thing shouldn't be lost sight of. I think it's time for our friends in Nepal to really think through both these aspects, what COVID could do for them, especially their economy, and how to bring things down so that you can leverage good relationships, connectivity. There are a dime a dozen things that can be done, provided you have the willpower and the willingness to look at them. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjeev, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, for your short yet very precise comments. I now turn to Professor Muni. Would you like to summarize your thoughts about the discussion so far? A couple of minutes, please.
Yes, it's a couple of points. To begin with, is you asked the question about 1816. I think I could not communicate what I wanted to say, it seems. What I wanted to say is 1816 context was different. That's what I said. Therefore, other matters, other issues have to be taken on board. And then the resolution has to be sought. I have the full original text of the treaty with me. I know all its aspects, Article 5th or 3rd or everything else, and how we then gave the territory. Raja was wanting it, he did not accept it. Let's forget about it. So please understand my reference to 1816 was simply to my Nepali friends that change the context. Don't get stuck on this. There are other points which need to be taken into account. So far as 1950 treaty is concerned, I think we should ask this question to my Nepali friends as to what is the structure of relationship you want with India. If it is an interdependence relationship which is built up in 1950 and you only have problems with the letters or some words being used there or not, or the nature of the treaty, we can sit down and finish it in 3 days. I mean, India has done it with Bhutan and there was absolutely no problem. But if you want to alter the total structure of the relationship, then we have to find out what suits us and what suits the Nepalese. And this is what they have to spell out very, very clearly. Secondly, I think I fully agree with Ambassador Puri when he says there is a new Nepal, and I must say that India has failed to understand and grasp its significance. That's why, in 2006, everybody in Nepal was praising India for the kind of change we brought about. And within 2 years, all that goodwill vanished because we started thinking it in a different, old traditional ways. So I think the Nepalese have to understand India is changing, and Indians have also to understand Nepalese are changing. There are very, very good references to economic cooperation, even joint market Dr. Lama is talking about. My problem is that unless you set the politics right, you would not be able to take economics to a very large extent. And the politics is vitiating economic relations all around. And therefore, the emphasis has got to be on that. And the last one, on the China being brought in as a trilateral discussion on that. I mean, I don't know who asked this question. That gentleman is not aware of the fact that in 1954, as well as in 2015, the Chinese have accepted Lipu Lake Pass as a part of India. And the Chinese are not openly saying it is not only 2015, 1954 treaty is it mentioned. Lipu Lake is mentioned. So and now after Mr. Ori's statements, the Chinese have officially come out and said that this is an issue to be discussed and negotiated and resolved bilaterally. And they have hinted that until then status quo should not be changed, which the Nepalese are changing. Therefore, there is no question of a trilateral discussion on this. The Chinese are not asking for it. The Indians don't see any margin for that. Therefore, this is simply politics. This is what to say that, okay, if I will bring my muscle here from there. That will not really do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muni, for also counseling that we need to take a holistic view and also pointing out those very, very important aspects. It reflects, of course, the very deep scholarship that you have on this subject going back, stretching so many decades. Now I turn to Dr. Bindu Lohani. A couple of minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Just less than a minute. To me, still the India-Nepal relations has to be looked into more from the prospect of economic cooperation and less from politics, unlike what has been said before. Thank you.
Yes, that will of course go down in the Guinness Book of Records as among the briefest, but of course very significant interventions. Professor Mahendra Lama, please. Professor Lama, are you with us?
Very much, yes.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Please summarize your thoughts. Yes. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. We have been discussing about this very fierce degree of anti-India perceptions movement in Nepal. And for us, one of the key reasons is somehow on the Indian side, we still consider the determining matrices of India-Nepal relations to be in a very, very traditional framework. I know we think that Nepal of 70s, 80s, 60s continue to remain the same. But whereas the constituents of decision-making process or the constituents that influence the decision-making process in Nepal have drastically undergone changes. I'll give you one simple example. In 1987, there were only 37 NGOs in Nepal. In 1992, it increased to 393. And by 2017, there were 13,759 NGOs in Nepal. You can imagine. And these NGOs, if you see the basic character of these NGOs, they have all kinds of longitudinal dimensions, compositions, orientations, financing systems. Somehow we have ignored. Right? They have so much of influence in every sector of Nepalese. So I think, and they are large number of them are very, very positive players there. They contribute a lot to the Nepalese development process. My second point is somehow, we have been lackluster in implementing some of the promised projects or whatever it is. Of course, we have made a very strong beginning, which was done at a record time, and our Prime Minister did devote a lot of time to this. But look at the agreement, like the motor vehicle agreement between India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. We thought that agreement would really change a major cross-border dynamics. The open border systems, it will really strengthen, consolidate on Sadpam. Today, that was signed in 2015, sometimes in June in Bhutan, and was supposed to be completed and implemented by December 2015. Today is 2020, and we are yet to do what you call a MOU on that. And nobody can explain how this happened, why this happened, though the protocols have been done. And these are the things which are taken full advantage by adversaries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lama. The next speaker, Dr. Govinda Raj Pokharel. 2 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Regarding this border issue, I already told you I'm not a bureaucrat and diplomat, so I support the idea of Bishnu Upreti. But regarding this reducing anti-India sentiment in Nepal, I think you need to engage more people. Like I support the idea of Ranjit Ray. Then also, although we have open border, but there are many grievances like as per treaty, there are many things allowed to export India, but which is not done at implementation level, not at the policy level. So I'm bringing in more investment to Nepal, creating more jobs, and also increasing more connectivity, like religious connectivity, Buddha circuit, Ramayana circuit. And this will bring people of both countries together, and that will reduce the anti-India feeling. Because I know that we are struggling to pass this MCC, which is around 50 billion Nepali rupees. But we have forgotten, we have not highlighted that we received around 56 billion Nepali rupees as a pension our soldiers are getting from India. So, I mean, if you bring people together, discuss and highlight these positive aspects, that will really then reduce the anti-India sentiment in Nepal. It's not like that you are a bit. It's not like if you maybe in Tribhuvan University campus but in maybe in urban areas. But I come from far west remote area, so half of the people are working in India. There is no anti-India sentiment as such. So it's only media and the people coming in Kathmandu, staying in Dwarikas, they realize there is some sort of anti-India sentiment. So let's have better connectivity, have more investment, more economic engagement of both sides. And regarding, except this border issue, if you bring only politicians and bureaucrats, it is not going to resolve. There are many business communities who are loving each other. There are many students, many civil societies, artisans, many people are there. So I think let's engage those stakeholders as well, not only media, politicians, and bureaucrats. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pokharel. And I think I like that suggestion that we should connect more. Who knows, COVID might actually bring us closer together, because it's impossible to have so many people meet up either in Delhi or in Kathmandu. But look at this. In the course of a webinar, we've actually been able to connect so many people, So that gives me an idea.
Implementing those, I mean, we have agreement, but if you go to the border, the implementation in both sides is not.
Yes. What I was saying is that this gives me ideas that in order to do more, we actually want to do many more such webinars with Nepal. By the way, this is the first such big webinar that India and Nepal have had since the dissonance crept in our ties recently. So let's do many more of these. And I'm going to ask Nihar to look into it and see how we can connect with many more people in Nepal on a regular basis. And why not? It's all for the better of our future. So now I turn to to the Honorable Abhishek Pratap Shah, Member of Parliament. A couple of minutes, please. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, sir. I agree with what Mr. Manjeev Singh Puri, the former ambassador, whatever he said. He said that, of course, Nepal will have a very high time in near future. So we need to have a better ties with India, because a lot of medical and a lot of medicinal equipments, they keep coming from India. So apart from that border dispute, we need to have a better relations with India counterparts, as well as I said earlier, we need to have a mutual benefits, we need to have a mutual cooperations, we need to have joint forces at the borders so that the crime rate could be lessened down. And I think these smaller issues and a lot of engagements, as you said, a lot of engagement, a lot of people-to-people connections, as Mr. Ranjit Racer also said, that a lot of cooperation, a lot of people-to-people connectivity, a lot of coming here and there, that can improve the relationship of Nepal and India. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shah. The last speaker, Nihar, would you like to summarize your thoughts in a couple of minutes? As in, we still have a speaker, but that's of a different order. We will be having closing remarks and the vote of thanks by Shri Sunil KC, CEO, founder of AIDIA, with whom we have together put up this webinar. But I'm now referring to the panelists. So, Nihar, you're the last one. 2 minutes.
I don't have any comments. No comments, sir.
No comments on India-Nepal relations is not a good idea. So please make a brief comment. We must always be engaged. So I want you to come in. Yes.
Yes, sir. I'll just make one brief comment on that. Honorable former Finance Minister of Nepal made observations that our 22 kilometer stretch Kakardita, Fulbari and Banglaband road is not in good condition. I think that is not the correct observation. It has been upgraded. It has been in a ready-made condition. So I think trial bus services between Nepal and Bangladesh has already done. So just negotiation is still going on, basically transit and and motor vehicle agreements. That negotiation is still on. So that road, that patch of road is absolutely perfect, and I think Nepal should take advantage of that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nihar. I now turn to Mr. Sunil KC, CEO, founder AIDIA, to please deliver the closing remarks and vote of thanks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you and the friends at Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis for collaborating with AIDIA to host the joint webinar on COVID-19 and Nepal-India relations. And I would also like to take this opportunity to express my profound appreciation to the all distinguished panelists for your valuable interventions and participation for the engagement. I believe that many experts' views expressed from both sides will be vital for shaping the right policy in response to deal with this pandemic and minimize the socio-economic impact in the bilateral level. Nepal-India shares very close economic interlinkage, including trade, investment, tourism, and there are more than 200 Indian companies which has been working very much successfully in Nepal. As I also co-chair the Nepal-India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and there has been very good examples of the Indian investments in Nepal, and that also shows the very much the vital cooperation in between Nepal and India. And I would also like to emphasize that there has been lacking of the Nepal-India summit, which India does, like India-Africa summit, India-East Asia summit, to bridge the gap with the people in Nepal and with the business community and with the civil society. I think India has to take an initiative to organize Nepal-India summit, which can accommodate the views, of the various stakeholders. And I would also like to remind that in 2017, with Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, we hosted the first Nepal-India think tank summit, which was the first biggest summit in between of Nepal and India among the intellectual circles. In a similar way, I think there is a encouragement from the government of Nepal side and from the Nepal-India Chamber of side that after the post-COVID, we are going to host the Nepal-India Partnership Summit to bring more investments from India to Nepal, and that will also help, to bring and to help the many Nepalese startup companies to get investments from India. And another thing, what we are trying to do is we are trying to set up Nepal Innovation House in Delhi in cooperation with government of Nepal. I think that will also play a major role to support the Nepalese startup through the Indian investments. And in the end, I would also like to thank all the participants who actively participated in today's webinar. And I also look forward to continue the similar stimulating and rational exchange of ideas in days to come. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunil, for your very thoughtful remarks and suggestions. This really brings us to the very end of our webinar. It will be, out of place if I did not thank my colleagues, Dr. Ashok Behuria and Dr. Nihar Nayak, for the very great efforts that they have put in to work with Mr. Sunil and his organization to put this together. And I do hope that you all found it very richly rewarding, that what we have discussed here at the end of the day proves helpful in bringing us closer together and bringing about a greater convergence between us, reducing the areas of differences that may prevail. So let us continue to make these efforts jointly. What we say and do after this webinar should also be helpful to our bilateral relations, and that's a thought that I leave with you. I therefore thank each of our panelists very profusely for their participation. Their interventions were of immense value. They've added scholarship at our end with their remarkable contributions. Once again, thank you very much, and please take care of yourselves and stay safe, stay at home, depending on your own lockdown regulations. There's no lockdown between India and Nepal. Just remember that. We will always be together. Thank you very much.
Bye.